Hello vinyl community, this is Mike with TCAT's Deep Vinyl Tracks, and we are now on the 6th installment of King Crimson's studio albums. As you remember when we talked about Lark's Tongues in Aspic, Jamie Muir decided to leave the band during their tour because he wanted to go join a monastery. And so he did that. I don't think he ever returned to music at all that I know of. But the band decided to continue on without him on their tour. And pretty much all of his percussion, all of his toys and everything kind of went to Bill Bruford, who took over all of the percussion and drumming responsibilities on tour and for the next couple of albums. So, it was starting to look like it might be the start of another major King Crimson lineup change, the one that seemed to happen every time there was a new album coming out. However, this didn't happen this time. Jamie was the only one to leave the band, and instead the band ended up having a very successful run as they did their tour for Lark's Tongues. However, this, even though it was only one album, was probably the most consistent lineup change from one album to the next for King Crimson up to this point. However, there was pressure from different people to release another album. So they started working on a new album, but unfortunately they didn't have a whole lot of material because of their busy schedule touring. So they were kind of in a position where they needed to have this album released, but they had very little material. So since they were concentrating on improvisation, they thought, well, wouldn't it be a great idea if we just used different material from our tours, since they did so much of it. And so that's what they did. They put together a bunch of material, made new songs out of it, or added it to other songs, and developed music off of that. And it also, showed how their live shows were going and how well they were doing in their live shows. So only 2 songs were entirely recorded in studio for this album, for this new album. All the others were altered live performances, and most of the audience noise was removed. If you're a really close listener, you can hear places where the audience noise does come through in different places on this new album. The new album, by the way, would be called Starless and Bible Black. And this is the cover for that album. My copy is not in the best of shape. There's some water damage on the bottom. The vinyl itself is in really good shape, however. There's what the back of it looks like, and a very kind of strange gatefold. Looks like a lot of letters that you can't really read. And also on CD. There's the track listing. And everything in this King Crimson Remaster collection on CD has been on pink labels. This one is the first one to change color with kind of a pale yellow color. So, Starless and Bible Black was released March of 1974, and it has 8 tracks on it, which is actually kind of a lot for most, considering most of King Crimson's albums up to this point. There were 4 tracks on this with vocals, and 4 tracks that were completely instrumental. And of course, the lineup consisted of Robert Fripp on guitar, mellotron, keyboards, and etc. John Wetton on bass and vocals, Bill Bruford on drums and percussion, taking up John Muir's place. As far as the percussion parts go, of course, Bill Bruford was with the band for Lark's Tongues. And David Cross on violin, viola, mellotron, and keyboards. So the title of the album comes from Dylan Thomas's play Under Milkwood. Now, another one rejoining the band for this particular outing was Richard Palmer James, who I understand I said his name wrong a couple of times in my last video, and I apologize for that. It's Richard Palmer James, and he was the lyricist. He wrote all of the lyrics for all of the tracks. So, the first track starts out with The Great Deceiver, and it runs 4 minutes and 2 seconds. It's attributed to John Wetton, Robert Fripp, and Richard Palmer James, of course, because of the lyrics. It was recorded, one of the 2 tracks that was recorded all in studio, and the lyrics refer to the devil and Fripp's feelings about commercialism at the time. The song was inspired by Fripp's visit to the Vatican City, where he's seen a lot of souvenirs that were being sold, along with statues of the Virgin Mary and different holy saints, and that's where the lyrics cigarettes, ice cream, and statues of the Virgin Mary come in during the chorus. The track is actually quite upbeat, a good starter track for the album, but it is also quite complex, putting you in the mood for what to expect for the rest of the album. And there are several odd timing changes throughout the entire track itself.
She called him son, she canonized the ground that he walked upon. Great deceiver, cigarettes, ice cream, figurines of the Virgin Mary. Cigarettes, ice cream, figurines of the Virgin Mary. Cigarettes, ice cream, Cadillacs, blue
Track number 2 was Lament, and it's 4 minutes, again attributed to the same 3, John Wetton, Robert Fripp, and Richard Palmer James, and it was the second track that was recorded completely in studio. So the first 2 tracks were the only 2 tracks completed entirely in the studio. It's a nice, calmer song than the one that starts out the album. It does eventually grow into a very quirky tune, and the lyrics deal with fame and living with fame. It's a bit more straightforward than the first track, but there is quite some interesting interplay between the musicians. Bruford really proves himself capable of taking on his own responsibilities. It is called Will Let You Know at 3 minutes and 46 seconds, and it is the first instrumental on the album, attributed to Bill Bruford, David Cross, Robert Fripp, and John Wetton. So the quartet, the touring quartet. It's a track that's entirely improvised and was recorded in concert in Glasgow. It starts with some soft meandering hesitation at first, but it comes together quite well and becomes even somewhat funky, a funky beat with everyone involved. You'll start to notice in King Crimson's music at this point that there is quite a bit of funkiness in their music. They get into a groove and really sounds cool. The very last few moments of the track itself kind of falls apart at the end, and the track just ends after a while. But still a very interesting track. The fourth track is called The Night Watch at 4 minutes and 39 seconds, and again is attributed to Robert Fripp, John Wetton, and Richard Palmer James. Only the opening section of this is live. The rest of it is in the studio. So most of it was recorded in studio. They just used part of the beginning introductory material from a live show. The song itself and the lyrics is about an observer trying to understand and describe Rembrandt's painting of the same name, The Night Watch. This one is a favorite of mine off of the album. There's a lot of changing moods through it, a lot of tense violin and shimmering instruments, and soon all of this changes to a steady beat. I think personally it matches the painting quite well. The guitar solo is quite beautiful, and there are some treated vocalizations in the middle of the track. There's a mellotron that shows up, and it was actually added in later because the mellotron broke down during the concert, so they weren't able to use it. So those parts were added in later.
The smell of paint, a flask of wine, and turn those faces all to me. The blunderbuss and halberd shaft of Dutch respectability that make their entrance to one by one defenders of that way of life. Red brick home, the bourgeoisie, and guitar lessons for the wife.
The fifth track is called Trio at 5 minutes and 41 seconds. This one is all instrumental and is attributed to David Cross, John Wetton, Robert Fripp, and Bill Bruford. Now, Bill Bruford's contribution to this has been called incredible restraint, in that they played back the track and well, no, actually, I didn't play back the track. The track was recorded live, but Bill was instructed just to join in whenever he felt was necessary. The entire track went by without Bill joining in because he felt like it was unnecessary. So they call his contribution incredible restraint. It's quite a nice and pensive improvised instrumental. It's very melodic for an improvised track, and it's been described as a quartet performed by 3 people. Track number 6 is called The Mincer at 4 minutes and 10 seconds, attributed to David Cross, Robert Fripp, Bill Bruford, and Richard Palmer James. So again, it has lyrics. It's the 4th track on here to this point to have lyrics. it's got a very long instrumental introduction, and all of that is part of an improvised live piece. John Wetton's vocals were dubbed in studio. Interesting thing about this track is it seems to cut off at the end, which it actually does. When they were recording the track in concert, tape constraints caused the track to suddenly be cut off because the tape ran out. So that's why the track sounds like it's cut off at the end. The lyrics on this are quite dark, possibly referring to a home invasion or even a murder, possibly. It's very atmospheric, has a spacey beginning, and there's a lot of heavy Verbotronics type stylings throughout the song. There is some harmonization involved in this, in the vocals, and since John Wetton was the only one to get any credit for vocals, it's possible maybe some harmonization was done through double tracking. That's a possibility at that point. But that track ends side one. So you get 6 full tracks on side one. Side two of Starless and Bible Black has 2 tracks, and these are both quite lengthy instrumental tracks. Track number 7 is the title track, Starless and Bible Black, at 9 minutes and 11 seconds, and is contributed to the quartet. Interesting thing about this is it's not to be confused with the track Starless, which comes on their next album, which is called Red. Starless is more of a structured track with some improvisation towards the end, a whole different feeling to that one. But Starless and Bible Black from this album is the one we're talking about. It is completely instrumental and completely improvised. The actual recording is shorter than the original improvisation because of vinyl and vinyl constraints at the time. They couldn't fit the entire thing on, so it is edited down to 9 minutes and 11 seconds, which is still a pretty long track. It's quite eerie, has an atmospheric beginning, some quiet meandering, which becomes more intense as it moves on, and as the band develops the improvisation. There's some interesting texture with a wailing guitar style mixed in with the interesting phrasing of the mellotron, gives it a very unsettling sound, which does finally resolve in the last few minutes of the track. And when it does resolve, it's quite impactful. It has quite an impact to the listener. Track number 8 is called Fracture, and it runs for 11 minutes and 14 seconds, completely attributed to Robert Fripp. which is interesting because, of course, Robert Fripp isn't the only one playing on it. It involves the entire band. But it is centered more around Robert Fripp's guitar and around some interesting riffs. Robert Fripp says that this is probably the most difficult guitar piece he has ever performed, and you listen to it and can understand why. Largely improvised instrumental, but still has more of a structural feel to it than what Starless and Bible Black did. The sound actually foreshadows the industrial style, industrial automatic feel that the band would further explore in the 1980s and the 1990s albums. There's a lot of broken guitar arpeggios that provide a framework for the heavy and amazing track that this is. It just moves beautifully from aggressive feel to relaxed feel and moves back and forth between this during the sections. But it's a very great track. I really enjoy this track probably more than probably one of my favorite instrumental tracks. So there you have it. And during the touring, another division starts to happen in the ranks. Of course, just to be expected. David Cross starts to feel like his violin parts are being drowned out, and which makes it so that he ends up having to be and play more synthesizer than violin, which is contrary to what he wants. Technical issues cause him to start to withdraw away from the music, and it just doesn't feel like his heart is into it. Because of this, he ended up being voted out of the band because of his lack of engagement. But this didn't happen until the end of the tour in 1974. Robert Fripp, surprisingly enough, also starts to feel more distanced from the music. He's always placed on stage between Bill Bruford and John Wetton, and feels like he's facing a flying brick wall. And of course starts to voice his frustrations concerning that. So there's some problems, some issues within the band, and there's a question as to where the band is going to move next for their next album. Starless and Bible Black is a great album for those that really enjoy the improvisation and the direction the band was taking. You really see it in this album, and is, of course, like all King Crimson albums, highly recommended. You can also see where a lot of bands are becoming inspired by their music. So that concludes this particular episode of King Crimson, and this is Starless and Bible Black. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and thank you for watching. We'll talk to you later.